My father stood up at my brother's wedding, raised his glass, and gave away the business I had spent 7 years building, and I did not cry or argue. I simply pulled out my phone under that table and dismantled everything before dessert was served. My father was holding a champagne flute when he did it. Not a microphone. Not note cards. Just a champagne flute raised toward the ceiling of the reception hall with the specific authority of a man who had been the loudest voice in every room he had ever entered and who had never once in 63 years been asked to lower it. The best man had sat down 40 seconds earlier. 112 people were in the warm collective motion of lifting their own glasses, ready to drink and move forward into the next portion of the evening, and my father stayed standing, and the room noticed him standing and went still because rooms had always gone still for my father. It was the thing he had built his entire life around. The room going still when he stood. He said, "I want to say one more thing about this family's future." I was at the head table. 4 seats for my brother Callum and his new wife Petra. I had a champagne glass in my hand and a speech I had delivered 43 minutes earlier that had made my mother cry in the way that was about genuine feeling rather than occasion, and I was in the specific pleasant exhaustion of someone who has done a difficult thing well, and has been given permission to simply be present for the rest of the evening. The kind of exhaustion that feels like rest. I had earned the rest. I had believed I was allowed to have it. My father looked at Callum. "Son, your wedding gift from me is the company. Effective the 1st of next month, Callum takes over as managing director of Hargrove and Associates." 112 people made the sound of a room that believes it has just witnessed something generous. Applause. A few voices of warm approval. Glasses raised again. The specific warmth of a crowd that has received a signal about how to feel and has felt it on cue. My name is Nora. 34 years old. I had been the managing director of Hargrove and Associates for 7 years and 3 months. I had taken it from a firm that was 8 months from insolvency, with 2 remaining clients and a reputation that had been quietly deteriorating for the 3 years before I arrived, and I had built it into something that invoiced consistently and had a waiting list for new clients and had been approached twice by acquisition firms at numbers that required sitting quietly with them before responding. I had declined both times. I had believed the firm was worth more as an independent entity built on the specific foundation I had laid, and I had been correct in that belief, and the subsequent years had proved it. 7 years and 3 months. Every strategic decision. Every client saved from the edge of terminating the relationship, and every new client won through the specific slow work of making people trust something they had not previously trusted. Every restructuring and every difficult hire and every contract negotiated at hours that were not reasonable hours. Every Tuesday and Saturday that had not existed as days off because there had always been something that needed to be done, and I had been the person who did it. Callum was 30 years old. He had worked at the firm for 14 months in a position I had created for him specifically because my father had come to my office 2 years ago and sat across from my desk and said he thought it would be good for Callum to have some real-world experience, and he thought the firm could use someone with Callum's energy. I had looked at my father across my desk, and I had understood what the conversation was, and I had created a position, and I had paid Callum well, and I had given him work that was real, and he had done it competently. Competently was the accurate word. Not excellently. Competently. I sat at the head table with the champagne glass still raised from the previous toast, and I listened to 112 people applaud the transfer of 7 years and 3 months of my work to my 30-year-old brother as a wedding gift, and I looked at my father sitting back down with the satisfaction of a man who has given something and has received the room's confirmation that the giving was large and good. My mother was looking at her plate. She was not looking at her food in the way of someone whose attention has been caught by the food. She was looking at her plate in the way of someone who has chosen the plate as the object of focus because focusing on the plate is what the moment requires of her. The specific deliberate quality of eyes that have been directed somewhere safe. She had known. She had known before tonight and had decided that the knowing required her to be very still and focused on the surface directly in front of her. I looked at Callum. He was looking at me across the 4 seats between us. His expression had something in it that I spent a moment trying to name accurately. Not guilt entirely. Not the full shape of guilt. Something closer to the expression of a person who has received a gift in a public setting and has registered, in the moment of receiving it, that the gift may have come from somewhere it was not entirely available to be given from, and who does not yet know what to do with that registration. Petra, beside him, was looking at her champagne glass. She had the careful quality of a woman who was new enough to this family to understand that what had just happened had a shape she had not been given the full dimensions of. I set my champagne glass down on the table. I looked at the room for a moment, at the 112 people settling back into the warm motion of a reception that had resumed its expected course. Then I reached down to my bag on the floor beside my chair and I took out my phone and I placed it in my lap under the tablecloth, and the tablecloth covered it completely. I need to tell you what the company actually was before I tell you what I did with my phone under that table. Hargrove and Associates had been started by my grandfather in 1987. A management consulting firm, regional, respected, built on the specific foundation of genuine expertise applied carefully over decades. My grandfather had run it until he could not and had handed it to my father, and my father had run it for 10 years in the way of someone who had inherited something valuable and had managed it with the confidence of someone who believed the value was inherent rather than maintained. By the time my grandfather could no longer watch what was happening to what he had built, the firm had 2 clients. 8 months of runway. A staff of 4 who were updating their resumes with a visible energy of people who had assessed the situation and reached a conclusion about its direction. My father had come to me at 31 with the managing director title in one hand and the phrase "I think you can fix this" in his mouth, and the implication underneath it that fixing it would demonstrate something about me he had been uncertain of since I had chosen a career in business rather than in the law the way he had wanted. I had taken the title and I had gone to work and I had fixed it, and the fixing had required everything I had across 7 years and 3 months, and I had given everything I had, and it had been enough, and then more than enough, and then significantly more than enough. The firm now had 22 employees. A client list that had been curated with the specific attention of someone who understood that the quality of the relationship mattered more than the quantity of the billing. A reputation in our regional market that arrived in rooms before I did. A valuation that the second acquisition approach, which had come in 8 months ago, had put at a number I had read 3 times before I believed it and then had declined because I had built something worth keeping and I had intended to keep it. My father had the title of founder on the firm's public-facing materials. It was a ceremonial designation that he had retained because I had allowed him to retain it and because the retention cost me nothing and cost him the specific dignity of still being associated with something his own father had built. Callum had the title of associate director. 14 months old. Created for him. Neither of them had the administrative passwords. Under the table my phone was open to the company's master administrative portal and my thumbs were moving. The room around me was warm and musical, and 112 people were eating and talking, and the specific ambient noise of a wedding reception in full progress filled the hall. My father was in conversation with the couple to his left. Callum was talking to Petra. Nobody at the head table was looking at my hands. I opened the client portal and navigated to the administrative settings and changed the master access credentials. New password generated by the system, randomized, stored in my personal password manager, which existed on my personal devices and was not accessible through any company system. I moved to the banking portal. The company's primary account was at a bank where I had been the sole authorized signatory for 4 years. My father had removed himself from the account in year 3 of my tenure during a Tuesday afternoon meeting in my office because the operational decisions had grown complex enough that his oversight was creating delays rather than providing guidance, and he had recognized this and had signed the relevant paperwork, and had left for a lunch that extended into early evening. Callum had never been added. There had been no occasion to add him, and I had not created one. I changed the banking portal credentials. The vendor management system where our relationships with 12 active vendors were administered. The payroll platform that processed compensation for 22 employees on the 15th and last day of every month. The contract database where every client agreement in its current and historical version lived in the filing structure I had built from the logic of my own thinking. The HR system containing every employment record for every person who had worked for the firm across 7 years. The cloud storage architecture I had built across years into a structure that reflected the specific organization of my mind and that could not be navigated usefully without understanding the logic that had produced it. One by one. Portal by portal. Methodical and unhurried because there was no reason to hurry. The dessert trolley had not appeared at the entrance to the reception hall. The dancing had not begun. 112 people were doing what wedding guests do in the middle of a reception when the food is good and the company is warm and the occasion has not yet reached its end. My mother appeared beside me. She had crossed from the parents' table without my noticing her cross, which was a skill she had developed across decades of moving through rooms where she believed her movement might create friction if it were observed. She was suddenly there, beside my chair, bending toward me with one hand on the back of the chair and her face close enough that I could see the specific quality of what was on it, which was not apology and was not explanation and was not the thing I needed from her, which was to have been told before tonight. Nora. The way she said my name when she did not have the words for the thing the name was meant to carry. She started a sentence twice and stopped it twice and then said, "He should have talked to you first. Go back to your seat." Nora. I am fine. Go back to your seat. She looked at my hands. The tablecloth was covering them entirely. She could not see the phone or what was on it. She straightened and looked at my face for a moment and then she went back to her seat and I went back to the administrative portal. Social media accounts. The firm's LinkedIn, which had been built over 7 years into a presence that carried real professional weight and that I had managed personally because I had understood from the beginning that the firm's public voice was a strategic asset. The website backend, where our service descriptions and case studies and team profiles lived. The email domain administrator account where every company email address was created and managed, including the addresses of 22 employees and the general contact addresses that routed to my inbox. I updated the primary contact on every active vendor account to my personal email address. Not a deletion. A transfer. Every invoice and renewal alert and service notification would now route to me rather than to the company's general inbox. I closed the final portal. Put the phone in my bag. Picked up the champagne glass. Looked at the room. My father still in conversation with the couple to his left, the satisfaction still readable on his face from 4 seats away. Callum laughing at something Petra had said, his hand on the back of her chair, the specific ease of a person who has received something and has not yet begun to understand what receiving it is going to require of him. I raised the glass. Not to anyone. Not as a toast. Just the motion of raising it and drinking from it and setting it back on the table in front of me. The dessert trolley appeared at the entrance to the hall. The room registered it with the warm collective attention of 112 people for whom the evening was proceeding exactly as an evening of this kind was supposed to proceed. I left at 9:45. Late enough that the dancing had been going for over an hour and departures had been accumulating for 40 minutes, and my own departure would not read as anything other than a guest leaving at a reasonable hour. I kissed my mother on the cheek and held the embrace for long enough that it communicated something without requiring words. I found Petra and embraced her and told her I was glad she was family now and meant it fully because Petra was steady and warm and had been exactly what Callum needed for the 3 years they had been together, and nothing that had happened at the head table had changed my understanding of that. I found Callum and I looked at him and I said congratulations, and I held his hand for a moment when he reached for mine, and the moment between us contained more than either of us said, and we both understood that, and let it be what it was. My father was on the dance floor with my mother. I did not cross the dance floor to reach him. I walked out through the reception hall doors, through the venue's foyer with its specific wedding venue quality of warm light and floral arrangements and the ambient sound of an event in progress behind me, and through the main entrance into the October night. The cold was immediate and clean. I stood outside for a moment and looked at the parking lot and the dark beyond it and listened to the October silence that existed just past the edges of the venue's noise. Then I got in my car and I drove. My phone produced its first notification at 11:16. My father. Calling. He had stepped away from the reception or found a quiet corner somewhere in the venue, and he was calling because something had come to his attention in the past hour and a quarter, some portal attempt or administrative notification or a call from someone who had tried to access something and found the access changed. I looked at his name on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail. He called again at 11:34. Voicemail again. At 11:51 a text arrived on the screen. Nora. Call me. I was in my apartment. Tea on the table. The company's master operational document open on my laptop, the document I had been building in private across the previous 3 years. A document that contained everything a person would need to understand the complete operational architecture of Hargrove and Associates. Client relationship histories and the specific context of each relationship. Vendor agreements and their renewal timelines. The internal culture as it had developed across 7 years and the specific approaches that had produced it. Strategic positioning and the reasoning behind it. The names of the 22 people who worked there and what each of them needed from leadership and how each of them communicated and what each of them was capable of beyond what their job descriptions said. Everything someone would need to run the firm well. I had been building it because I had understood for 3 years that my father was going to do something with the firm that I had not been consulted about, and I had wanted to be ready when the something arrived. At 11:53 I sent one email. My father, Callum, and all 22 staff members in the field. The subject line was straightforward. The body was 4 sentences. Effective immediately, I was stepping back from my role as managing director of Hargrove and Associates. I wished the firm every success under its new leadership. An administrative transition document would be provided in the coming days. I thanked the staff for 7 years of extraordinary work together. Professional. Complete. Every word accurate. Sent it. Closed the laptop. Put the teacup in the sink. Went to bed. My father called 4 more times before midnight. I did not answer any of them. Callum called at 12:31. I looked at his name on the screen for 2 rings and then I answered because Callum deserved a different conversation than the one my father was trying to have, and I had understood from the moment at the table when I had read his face that he had not known, or had not known the full shape of what he was receiving, and that distinction mattered to me even in the context of everything else. His voice when it came through was quiet and had the specific quality of someone calling from a dark room while the rest of the world is elsewhere. Nora. Congratulations on your wedding. I mean that. A pause. What did you do? What needed doing? That is? He stopped. Started again. He said the systems are locked. Yes. All of them. All of them. The line was quiet long enough that I could hear him breathing and hear the absence of the reception noise that would have been there 2 hours ago. Then, I did not ask him to do that. I want you to know that I did not ask him. I told him I believed him. He asked what happened now. Now you and Dad figure out how to run a management consulting firm. He said my name once more. Get some sleep, Callum. You are on your honeymoon tomorrow. I ended the call. My father arrived at my apartment at 8:40 the next morning. I watched him on the intercom camera for a moment, standing at the building entrance in the specific posture of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say and is ready to deliver it. I buzzed him up. He came through the door and looked at the apartment, at the teacup on the table, at me sitting at the kitchen table, and the rehearsed energy shifted slightly when he saw my face because my face was not what he had prepared for. He had prepared for upset and visible distress and the performance of a person who had been wounded and was waiting for the wound to be acknowledged and addressed. He had prepared a version of this conversation that began with my distress and ended with his explanation providing some resolution to it. I was drinking tea at the kitchen table. He sat down across from me. He started the sentence he had prepared. Last night was meant to honor the family. I did not think you would. You gave my company to my brother at his wedding without telling me. It is the family business. It was an insolvent firm with 2 clients when you handed it to me and told me to fix it. I fixed it. For 7 years and 3 months I fixed it. And now it passes to the next generation as it should. You gave it to Callum? Callum has been there 14 months in a role I created for him. I'm the generation that built what you gave away. You are family. This is how family businesses work. I was family in 2017 when I was working 14-hour days to keep it from closing. I was family for every year between then and last night. He looked at the table. You did not tell me because you knew what I would say. He started to answer and I held up one hand. You knew I would say no. And you needed the no to be impossible. So you raised a champagne flute at your son's wedding in front of 112 people and made it a gift because a gift announced publicly cannot be refused without the refusal becoming the story. I looked at him. You built a room where no could not exist. And then you invited me to sit in it. He did not speak for a long time. What did you do to the systems? I protected what I built. Those systems belong to the company. The company cannot access them without me. That has been true for 7 years. I made it explicit. Nora. You cannot simply. I have. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window the morning was doing what October mornings do, gray and specific and indifferent to the conversations happening inside the buildings it illuminated. I will make you a proposal. He looked up. I will restore full administrative access to every system. I will produce a complete operational transition document. I will consult for a defined period to ensure continuity for the staff and the clients. He was listening. In exchange, I want 3 things: a formal valuation of the firm at current market value, a negotiated compensation reflecting my contribution to that value across 7 years, and a conversation, with lawyers present on both sides, about what the correct structure of this transfer should have been and what correcting it looks like. You are talking about money. I'm talking about 7 years of work that was raised in a champagne flute and given to someone else as a gift. Yes. I'm talking about what that work was worth and what is owed for it. He said my name. Talk to your lawyer. Then come back. He came back 4 days later without the lawyer. He sat at the kitchen table and he looked different from the man who had stood with the champagne flute. Smaller in the specific way that people become smaller when the room has stopped confirming them. I did not think about what it cost you, he said it looking at the table and then looked up. I thought about what it would mean for Callum. For the continuation of something my own father built. For the family name associated with something successful. He stopped. I did not think about what it cost you to make it successful. I let the sentence sit where he had placed it. 7 years. I know. Every system in that building runs on decisions I made. Every client relationship was built or rebuilt by me. Every person on that staff was hired by me or retained through a difficult period by me. The valuation that the acquisition firm put on it 8 months ago exists because of 7 years of my work. I know. You stood up at your son's wedding and gave it away. I know. He put both hands flat on the table. What do you need from me? I told you what I need. The valuation process. Start there. The process lasted 3 months. A formal independent valuation that produced a number that required my father to sit with it quietly before he responded. A negotiation conducted through lawyers that was uncomfortable and necessary and that arrived at an outcome that compensated me in specific and meaningful terms for 7 years of work that had been raised in a champagne flute and given away at a wedding reception before the dessert was served. Callum participated in parts of the process with the specific seriousness of someone who had been given a responsibility and was trying to be worthy of it. He was trying. That mattered. Callum took over the managing director role on the first of the month as my father had announced. The first 3 months were the specific difficult months of someone learning what a role actually contains versus what the role looked like from the position of associate director for 14 months. He called me 11 times during those 3 months. I answered 9 of the calls. The 2 I did not answer were questions he needed to work out without my voice in his ear, and he worked them out, which told me something about him that the 14 months of adequate performance had not fully told me. I delivered the transition document in a 4-hour meeting with Callum and his 2 most senior staff members. Elaine, who had been with the firm since year 3 of my tenure, sat across from me for 4 hours and absorbed everything in the document, and at the end of the meeting looked at me across the table with the specific expression of someone who has spent 3 years adjacent to something and has just understood for the first time its full dimensions. How did you carry all of this? 1 year at a time. We did not understand what you were doing. While you were doing it. Most people doing the work do not announce the work. We should have understood it. Yes. My father and I had dinner in December. A restaurant he chose and reserved and paid for without discussion, which was his way of acknowledging that something was owed without requiring a conversation about the acknowledging. We sat across from each other and talked about the firm and about Callum and about the 3 months of the valuation process, and then we talked about other things, about my mother's garden and a book he had been reading and the specific quality of the winter light in the city at that time of year, and then we sat in the particular quiet of 2 people who have had a true thing pass between them, and are still learning what the table looks like with the truth on it. I should have asked you. Yes. I thought I was being generous. You were being generous with something that was not entirely yours to give. I understand that now. Good. A pause. The restaurant moved around us. I am proud of what you built. I looked at him. I was proud of it before last night. I should have said so before I raised the glass. I said yes. He said, "Will you tell me? If I do something like this again?" I looked at him for a moment. "You will not do something like this again." He held my eyes. "Because now you know I will pull out my phone." Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and not quite regret and was entirely genuine and entirely his. "Under the tablecloth the entire time," I said, before the dessert was served. He said, "I did not see it." I said, "I know." We finished dinner. He paid. We walked out into the December cold and he put his hand on my shoulder briefly before we turned toward our separate cars and drove home through the winter city in our separate directions. I sat in the apartment that night with the lights low and I thought about a champagne flute and 112 people and a tablecloth and a phone and 7 years of work and what it looks like when you protect something quietly and completely in the same room where it is being given away and nobody in the room sees it happening until it has already happened. Know what you have built. Know every system. Every password. Every account. Every access point. Know the architecture of what you have constructed well enough that you can navigate it in the dark with your thumbs under a tablecloth while the room around you applauds the transfer of it to someone else. Because the people who hand you a broken thing and ask you to fix it are not always the same people who will protect the fixed thing once it exists. Sometimes they will raise a glass at a wedding and give it away before the dessert. Before you take the seat at that table, know where your phone is. Know what it can reach. Know that the most powerful thing you can do in a room where something is being taken from you is to say nothing to the room, do everything under the table, and let the dessert trolley appear at the entrance before anyone understands what has occurred. The tablecloth was there the whole evening. Nobody looked down once.